So in recent news, and a video topic people have wanted me to talk about, is John Scott. And I figure, what the heck? It's a Tuesday night, it's the beginning of January. The Leafs just blew a 4-2 lead very quickly here. Why not? Um, Now, when John Scott first came into hockey, nobody really paid a whole lot of attention. He's an enforcer, strictly an enforcer. In 06-07, his first professional season, he had 107 penalty minutes for the Houston Aeros, 1 goal, 5 assists, 6 points. I remember he moved between defense and the wing, and it didn't really seem to matter. His first NHL action was 08-09. He played 20 games for the Wild at 21 penalty minutes, was a -1, 1 assist. In 09-10, played 51 games, had 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 points. In 10-11, he went to the Blackhawks, 40 games, 1 assist. 11-12, 29 games for the Hawks, 1 assist, and then he gets moved to the Rangers where he gets 6 games, no points. 12-13, he plays for the Sabres, 34 games, no points. 13-14, 56 games for the Sabres, 1 goal, no assists, 1 point. And then he goes to the Sharks in 14-15, 3 goals, 1 assist, 4 points, 38 games. 15-16, Arizona, he plays 11 games, 1 point. And then he played 1 game at the end of last year for Montreal. See, in 286 games, John Scott has 5 goals, 6 assists, 11 points, 544 penalty minutes, and apparently his career is now considered at an end. There's been a lot of people who've said a lot of things about the NHL trying to keep John Scott out of the All-Star game. And in the end, I was on board with it, but in the beginning, I wasn't. The only reason John Scott was being voted for is because he was the least likely person to ever get to an All-Star game. I remember topics on certain Canuck forums about whether or not he'd ever score a goal in the NHL again. Ridiculing any goaltender that allowed a goal to John Scott. Like, the thing that was weird for me last year is John Scott, who had been, from what I had seen, he'd been derided by fans of teams that he didn't play for. Okay, now I'm not talking about fans of teams he played for. So if you cheer for the Hawks, the Sabres, the Rangers, Minnesota, and you cheered for John Scott, you're not the guys I'm talking about. But fans of other teams, John Scott was kind of the whipping boy. Like he was the measurement by which you measured all other players. Like you would say useless as John Scott. That was the critique. Now, was it right? No. Form of bullying? Absolutely. Hockey fans are known for their bullying. Um, I've seen it on my channel. I've seen it on any channel related to sports, actually. And just in general on YouTube, there's a lot of comment sections you just don't want to look at. And I've done my best to keep it clean on my channel. Um, to keep that kind of garbage and flaming and skullduggery out of it. But John Scott's whole reason for being a leader on that All-Star ballot is to make a mockery of the NHL, to make a mockery of the system. Now, as it turned out, John Scott was allowed to play the game, and he was an inspiration, and he ended up being the MVP of the game, and he was carried around on the ice, and it had a good ending. But it didn't have the best of intentions at the start. And it started well before the John Scott vote. It started with a vote for Rory, and any Canuck fan remembers vote for Rory. Rory Fitzpatrick, defenseman for the Canucks, journeyman, would never have got anywhere near an All-Star ballot. But hockey fans went, hey, we can vote for anybody. Let's vote for Rory. I understood why the NHL let you vote for anybody. I think the idea was it would allow for, let's say, for instance, right now in Nashville, Victor Arvidsson. Maybe Arvidsson wouldn't get anywhere near an All-Star ballot, and maybe he'd get voted on based on the merits of his play. But when you're allowing online voting, you're catering to the lowest common denominator. And as such, Rory Fitzpatrick was the choice the Canuck fans made. Now, nobody who watched the Vote for Rory movement is surprised at what happened with John Scott. Rory Fitzpatrick was leading, and then all of a sudden he wasn't. The NHL took care of it. And I to this day, I don't know whether they just wiped out votes for Rory and added votes for other guys. I don't know if NHL committee members on some level had something to do with it, but some kind of skullduggery took place because Rory was in good shape to be in that All-Star game, and then all of a sudden he wasn't, and it wasn't mentioned again. And I never saw a movement like it in hockey again until John Scott. And the thing was, the Rory thing, it was Canuck fans doing it, and because it was Canuck fans, it was easy for fans of other NHL teams in Canada to say, "Oh well, we hate Canuck fans, so we're not going to get behind that." With John Scott, because it's Arizona and it's kind of a neutral site, it's not a site that we have any, a lingering resentment for, like we might for Toronto or Calgary, or like Canadian fans fight with one another. But John Scott seemed like a genuinely nice guy, and I think at some point people started to realize that. I know when they had John Scott on TSN for Free Agent Frenzy last July, I was absolutely very interested in everything he had to say. He was very entertaining. I really hope he gets a job as a color commentator in the NHL. And I think when Don Cherry looks to call it quits and retire, a guy like a John Scott would be perfect to take over. I'm not necessarily saying he in particular, but that's the kind of guy you want. He's very personable, very nice guy. And I think for some of us who had picked on John Scott, we started feeling bad for him. And unlike the Rory movement, which never really had a big movement outside of Vancouver, the John Scott movement was everywhere. It was every fan everywhere was like, no, the NHL made this system, and we want John Scott in the All-Star game. Did he belong there? No. Nobody will ever claim John Scott on merit belonged in the All-Star game. But the NHL system, the way it was set up, he was capable of getting into the All-Star game because all we had to do was click vote. And towards the end of the vote, I was voting for John Scott. Because once the NHL clearly went to Arizona and said, look, make this go away, and suddenly he's traded to Montreal so the NHL can say, you guys have been voting for him for the Western Conference. Now he's in the East. We're sorry he can't play. Because that happened, I started voting for John Scott. I loaded up their website. I'm like, I want to start voting for John Scott. I was voting 15, 20 times a day for John Scott. Because it was like, no, this is not the system you got. And they were more transparent about their desire not to have John Scott in there than they were about Rory Fitzpatrick. And I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because Rory wasn't an enforcer. He was just an average defenseman, a number 6 guy who was number 7 on a good team. A guy who came to the rink every night and did his best. Wasn't always the greatest in the league, but he's Rory Fitzpatrick. He was a guy who was very easy to get behind. But John Scott proved to be a very easy guy to get behind as well. And then at the last minute, the NHL realized they had a major problem on their hands. They had a major public relations fiasco, and they allowed John Scott to play in that game. Now, John Scott's writing a book, and there have been rumors of a movie. Now, if they're going to do a movie based on the John Scott thing, they should do it soon. As in, release it this coming fall or next spring, because a sports story like this is interesting and it's fun. I don't know what kind of shelf life it's going to have. Maybe you guys can let me know in the comments how long of a shelf life do you think a John Scott movie would have? Would you watch it? I know I would. And, let me know in the comments below how you felt during the whole All-Star thing. We're coming up on the first anniversary of that because, All-Star weekend's coming up in a few weeks. So I figured I'll throw the John Scott video out there. I'll see what you guys think. And it is an interesting idea because today the NHL announced its 4 voted in captains for the All-Star game. So they've learned. You can no longer vote for just anybody. So John Scott broke it. He broke what Rory Fitzpatrick almost broke. He broke the voting system. So the NHL said, all right, we got to revamp this. And It's funny because I honestly almost understand where the NHL was coming from, but they set it up that way, so they can't get too angry about it because they set it up that way. All right, that's it for me on this subject. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you're just browsing through, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. I will be back to discuss tonight's action once tonight's action is all wrapped up. It looks like uh, the Columbus Blue Jackets are in really good shape to extend their winning streak to 16 games. So I'll be on about that 16-game winning streak too, and my little small issue with equating it to the Penguins. Small, major, actually. Anyways, just let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll talk to you all again soon.